Hello class, Professor Jim Albrecht here. In this lesson we're going to be looking at a poem by Emily Dickinson, a great poet, one of my favorite poets, but also a complicated and difficult poet to read. She writes short poems, very compressed, poetic lines often, and there's a lot of unpacking that you have to do as a reader to make sense of her poem. So we're going to go through one poem here, poem number 341, After Great Pain, A Formal Feeling Comes, a fantastic poem, and I'm going to take you through the poem, show you some things to be aware of and pay attention to as you're reading the poem, and then this will hopefully get you launched on your reading of this poem and other Dickinson poems that we're going to take a look at. So, here's what I'd like you to keep in mind as you read this poem and other poems. First of all, just read the entire poem through for comprehension. Don't worry about trying to analyze it at first. Just what is the poem's subject? What general approach to or insights about that topic does the poem seem to offer? Then go back and reread the poem and pay attention to these things. Does the poem have a regular structure? For instance, is it divided into stanzas? And how does the poem's discussion of its subject develop through these units? Next, are there identify surprising or challenging words and phrases, especially metaphors? This poem that we're going to look at, like many of Emily Dickinson's poems, is built around metaphors. So you have to pay attention to the central metaphors in the poem. Next, listen to the music of the poem's language, and where there seems to be something really interesting going on in the sound of the poem, how is that enhancing the poem's meaning? And then lastly, after you've paid attention to those things, reread the entire poem and think about how those different poetic elements fit together to create the meaning and the experience, the artistic experience of the poem. So first, we're going to take a look at the poem and especially listen to the poem. I'm going to read it to you. It's very important to hear poetry. So we read with our eyes, we read with our ears, and at the same time as we are thinking about ideas in a poem. So, after great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious, like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore? And yesterday? Or centuries before? The feet mechanical go round, of ground or air or aught. A wooden way, regardless grown, a quartz contentment, like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow. First chill, then stupor, then the letting go. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about some of the challenging words and metaphors in the first stanza. And you did notice, I hope, that the poem is divided into 3 stanzas. So we'll take it one stanza at a time. Here in the first stanza, some of the words that should jump out to you is that word formal. What are the different meanings of the word formal? And what on earth would a formal feeling be? In that next line, that big word ceremonious. What does ceremonious mean? And notice we have a metaphor there. Nerves are sitting ceremonious. What would it mean for nerves to sit and ceremonious? And then we have another metaphor in that line, a simile in this case, like tombs. And then we have a metaphor, or an interesting description at least, of the heart, the stiff heart. Well, why on earth would a heart be stiff? In the second stanza, there are other interesting and challenging words and phrases for us to pay attention to. Mechanical, wooden. What are those words communicating or suggesting? And in the final line, line 9 of the second stanza, quartz being used as an adjective, a quartz contentment. What is that? And then another simile, like a stone. And you notice, I hope, that there is a certain pattern, several patterns of imagery that seem related in the poem here. The ones I've highlighted in blue for you, I think you can see we've got images of the body, the nerves, the stiff heart, the feet, and then an image at the end of the poem about freezing persons. So what are those images of the body doing in the poem? And another pattern or series of images, tombs, wooden, quartz, stone, lead. How do these two patterns of images in the poem fit together? Now let's talk a little bit about sound in the poem. Uh, is the poem written in a meter? Yes, it actually has two different kinds of meter. Now, Dickinson, as we've already discussed in class, you've already seen in a video about Dickinson, used oftentimes in her poems a version of what's known as ballad meter or hymn meter, because it's a meter that many popular ballads have been written in, many religious hymns are written in, and that is a meter in which you have 4-beat lines alternating with 3-beat lines, the beats being stresses per line, and 4-beat, 3-beat alternating in 4-line stanzas, also known as a quatrain. So here's an example first from the poem of 2 lines from one of the stanzas that's written in ballad meter, and I have highlighted in blue for you the stressed syllables, the beats. So see if you can hear this. The feet mechanical go round of ground or air or aught. You can really hear the 3 beats in that second line. But the whole poem is not written in that meter. It's very familiar that many of Dickinson's poems, you'll find the whole poem written in that ballad meter. But other parts of the poem are written in another meter that you probably know if you've ever studied Shakespeare in school, iambic pentameter. And these are 10-syllable lines that have 5 stresses per line if the line is completely regular. So here, the first 2 lines of the poem are in iambic pentameter, and some lines at the end of the poem are in iambic pentameter as well. And that last line, the nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. That line has 10 syllables, and you can also hear, I hope, the alternating unstressed followed by a stressed pattern in the rhythm. So there is a meter in this poem, or various meters, multiple meters for you to pay attention to. But knowing that a poetic line is in a meter doesn't really tell us about the rhythm or the dramatic music or sound of any particular line. So I wanted to call your attention to 2 lines in the poem where I think there's something interesting you should be able to hear with your ear. These are both iambic pentameter lines. Listen to these lines and think about what is creating the particular sound in these lines. Is it rhythm? Is it a pattern of stresses? Or is it sounds in the words? The nerves sit ceremonious like tunes. A quartz contentment like a stone. I think there's maybe something similar going on in these 2 lines, and see what you hear as a reader. And again, the question there is, how does the music of the poem enhance the meaning at that point? And I think if you go back and listen to the poem, you'll also see that there are some other patterns of rhythm in the poem. And I've highlighted some of the phrases in the poem that leap out to my ear as a reader. Great pain, like tombs, stiff heart, like a stone, hour of lead. What do you hear in those phrases from the poem, and why is Dickinson interested in that kind of music? Then lastly, we'll look at the final stanza and think about challenging language and metaphors there, and how the poem progresses to a conclusion through its stanzas. The most interesting words that leap out to me are the hour of lead. What is that? It's obviously a kind of a metaphor. And then we have a central metaphor in the last stanza. Something is being compared to freezing persons, as freezing persons recollect the snow. Well, what is that metaphor all about? And finally, what kind of a conclusion or wisdom or insight has Emily Dickinson brought us to by the end of this poem? That great pain that is announced at the beginning of the poem as the subject of the poem. What have we learned about it by the time we reach the end of this poem? So now your task is to put the pieces together and reread the poem. So with these elements of the poem that I've brought to your attention, reread the poem, re-experience the poem, and ask yourself, how do these elements, various elements of Dickinson's poetic style, work together to create this poem's meanings and its special emotional or imaginative power? So, happy reading with this poem and the other Dickinson poems that we'll be reading, and I can't wait to hear what your responses are.